Thank you so much. Glad to see you guys out there. So yeah, I am the lovely Jeff Lazell, apparently. And I'm here from Xrayed Color Management, but before that, I worked in the post-production side of the photo industry doing retouching, file management, printing, all that sort of stuff for about a decade. And so what I hope to do today, as well as teach you guys about color management, is to just take a lot of the experience I got there on that side and show you guys a lot of tips and tricks for setting up your own color-managed, effective digital workflow. But to start, I actually have a few questions for you guys so we can get better acquainted, make sure we're on the right foot starting out. So, who here captures in RAW? Ooh, all right, that's very good. So for everything I'm going to talk about today to be fully effective, RAW capture is essential. The reason there is when you set your camera to capture in JPEG rather than RAW, you're in a sense giving it permission to throw out all the information it thinks you don't need or will ever need. So a lot of that color information, that exposure information that we're going to want to work with today to get the best quality output we can hope for is just sort of thrown out in basically the quest for compression, which is what JPEG is. Now the next question, which is always way more loaded than the RAW question, is who here regularly calibrates their monitor? Well, still good, but not the best. So anytime we begin to talk about color in any visual workflow, whether it's a video workflow, graphic design, or of course photography, properly calibrated monitor is essential. The reason there is you can't really begin to make informed decisions about what you're doing if you don't know whether you're looking at the file or the settings of the monitor. And moreover, when you then begin to output either to someone else's screen or most problematic is the print, you're going to have issues because you are correcting to the monitor, not the printer. Now, I know a lot of people don't do this because it sounds super complicated and a pain in the butt, but it really isn't. So I'm actually going to shift out of the slide presentation for a second, and I'm going to take you guys into a quick monitor calibration so you can see how easy it is to set up. So I have a few devices with me here today for monitor calibration. I have the ColorMonkey display, which is this guy. I have its bigger brother, the i1 Display Pro. And then I have the ColorMonkey Photo. So the ColorMonkey Photo does monitors, projectors, and printers. So we're going to visit this guy a little bit later on. These guys both do monitors, projectors, and now mobile devices through our free app. So iPads, iPhones, and select Android devices can now be calibrated for a photographic workflow. Difference between these two guys, I know because they look pretty much exactly the same, is the software backing them up. Ooh. So this guy, the ColorMonkey display, manages your color. The i1 Display Pro 2 allows you to control your color management. So this is our tool that's aimed specifically at photographers who just sort of need an out-of-the-box solution. You just want to get calibrated. You don't need to do too much custom settings. The i1, on the other hand, is basically infinitely customizable as far as white point, as far as luminance goes. It's a bit more thorough. It's a bit faster. And it also has things built in for quality checks and health of your monitor. So you can actually use it to track your monitor to make sure it's still operating at the optimal level. And it will also do uniformity checks. So if anyone here uses a really big monitor, you can actually use this device to make sure that the color isn't wandering to the edges. You want to make sure that what you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner is the same you're seeing in the lower left. But today, I want to show you guys the ColorMonkey display, because like I said, for most photographers, this is one of the best solutions because it's quick and it's painless. So you can see up there that, open it up, 2 buttons, profile my display, profile my projector. They're about identical. Obviously, there's differences because one's a projector, one's a monitor, but the actual workflow is about the same. I'm going to take you through display right now. So you click on display. You can see it's asking me which one I want to calibrate. That's because I'm connected to the projector so you guys can see it, as well as the other guys. If you're not connected to a multiple monitor setup, this will go. So you see down here, it says display match. So what this will do is this will enable you to match multiple monitors together. Now, just a small caveat there, your video card has to be able to support it. But if you have a video card that's able to support dual monitors and dual lookup tables, which we can talk about a little bit later, you can make the 2 displays match by clicking that button. So what you would do is you'd pick your primary one, profile it, go to your secondary one, click display match, and it'll match to the first one. It's also useful if you have one monitor that you spent a lot of money on and another monitor you didn't spend so much money on, but you want them to match anyway. So I'm just going to do color LCD for now, and also plug in the device, which is always a good first step. These devices are designed to hang over the monitor, So there's actually a weight you guys can see that you can move around for the size of your monitor. And as I mentioned with the projectors, it'll sit on a stand, but there's also a tripod mount if you want to mount it to a tripod, like a situation like this where it's a bit far away. So plug this guy in. There we go. Next. Now it's going to ask you the difference between the settings. So there's easy, advanced, and then we actually built in video standards, because we know a lot of photographers are now using their DSLRs to split, right, to take video and stills. So you see down here, there's PAL-C-CAM, which is the broadcast standard for Europe, NTSC, which is the broadcast standard for America, and then REC up here is the digital standard. So if you were editing files from, say, a Blackmagic camera, for instance, you can make a profile, so your monitor is set up for that, and you can actually make two. So you can make a photo profile and a video profile and shift back and forth. Now the difference between easy and advanced. Advanced gives you some abilities to tweak. Like I mentioned in the i1, these are infinite. Here, though, it gives you the ability to change your white point. D65 is, of course, the recommended one, but some older printers for print matching require D50, so you can do that as well. And then luminance down here. You can allow the color monkey to automatically determine it or set a target luminance. So what we're actually talking about here is another layer on top of color that actually causes photographers a lot of problems, which is brightness and contrast. Most monitors from most manufacturers are not set up with photography in mind. They make their displays way contrasty, way bright, so when you walk by them in the Apple store, it pops out at you. It makes video games look good. It makes movies look good. It's horrible for its photography. So it's another thing we're going to be doing when you calibrate is making sure that you're set up specifically for photography work. So now I'm going to leave it in easy because easy just basically sets you the recommended defaults. And most photographers really don't need to shift into advanced unless you're specifically told or specifically looking for a different output. So we'll go to next. Now, what I was just talking about brightness and contrast. All three of these devices has what's called an ambient light sensor. So it's actually going to read the room you're in to make sure that your display is set up properly for that room. It might be a little bit funky in here because of the lighting, but it wants to read the room. And this is the only trick, I promise. The only trick to the whole process is you can't have it right in front of the monitor because it thinks the monitor's light is the room's light, the monitor's light is the room light. It gets confused. So put it off to the side, measure. It gives you a lux reading, which is automatically built into your profile. So you hit next, and you remove the diffuser, you spin it around, and then you would hang it over the monitor like this, over the target you can see in the center of the screen. Again, like I mentioned before, for uniformity, you want to be in the center of the screen because that's where you get your most accurate reading, because out to the side. Now, if I hit next here, it would say make sure it's flat on the screen, and then it would start its battery of tests. So what it's going to do is it's going to go light, it's going to go dark, and it's going to start flashing colors. All the calibrations are done at the video card level. So what it's going to be doing is it's saying, OK, video card, I want to see this specific red. And then the video card shows it this specific red, and it says, OK, you're off by this much, and records it for later. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your setup. But even for a lecture on color management, that's way too boring to make you guys sit through. So I'm not going to make us all sit around and watch a bunch of flashing colors. So just pretend I hit that. Pretend it flashed for about 5 minutes. And then I'm going to go back in and show you what it looks like when it's done. So this is the screen you're going to be greeted with when you're first finished. Now, it's going to ask you to name the profile. And so that's what I was talking about before of making multiple profiles. Like if you're making one for video, making one for photo, up there you could put photo after it, or video after it. And you see up there I have D65 after it. That's just in case I want to go back to the stock Apple profile. You know, every once in a while I watch a movie on my laptop, I'm not editing photos, I want to shift back to how it looks. You can do that because they're all stored in. Then after that, it's going to ask you how often you want to be reminded to reprofile. Now, I know nobody likes to be nagged by their computer to do anything. I agree too. But getting on a regular schedule is pretty important for this because the truth is there is no monitor that won't wander. Even really expensive monitors eventually will lose the calibration. And so I recommend for laptops, you do it every 2 weeks because you're opening, you're closing it, you're putting it in your bag, you're walking around, it's shaking and stuff like that. For a desktop, I would start it once a month, but this is something that you're going to have to basically tune into yourself because Some monitors hold it longer, some monitors hold it less long. That's also another important thing to note if you're doing multiple monitors together. So if you have 2 monitors that are from different manufacturers and you calibrate them together and it looks great, and the next day it doesn't, it could mean that one of your monitors is losing the calibration faster than the other one is. So you just sort of have to use this as a basis to start your schedule on calibration. And like I said, once you get going, it takes about 5-10 minutes max. I always suggest start it and then go get your editing beverage of choice, whether that be hot coffee or cold beer, whichever you prefer. And so then, after that, you're going to get the before and afters. So you can actually load in whatever image you know here very well. There's a set of loaded in stuff for before and afters. And so this is the first time you're going to see the calibration. And the most drastic change is going to be the first time you do it. Because if you keep on a good schedule, allowing that your monitor is healthy, it shouldn't change very much. But right now, I'm going to be totally honest with you guys, it might look kind of weird at first. And that is because our eyes adjust amazingly quickly. So you've been staring at this monitor, and you're used to how it looks, and now it looks different, and immediately your eye says wrong. But you can trust that it did what it's supposed to do, I promise. And so then after that, it's going to ask you about ambient light monitoring. So do you remember in the beginning when I read the room? So when I did production, I worked in the basement. The light was constant. I didn't have to worry about it. But we know that a lot of photographers work in rooms with windows, right? So you take that ambient light reading, and it's going to change throughout the day. So you can actually leave this device attached, switch on ambient light monitoring, and it will check the room every 5 minutes. And it will either auto-adjust. I think I have another. Yeah, it'll either auto-adjust or it'll warn you. It used to just be auto-adjust, but it drove some people crazy. So it'll warn you and it'll say, hey, the light's drastically changed. You might want to adjust the settings this way just so it's the best of you. All right. So next, now our monitor is on point. We were good in shooting raw. Let's talk about getting the color right on the capture side. So for that, I have to offer you guys is the Color Checker Passport, which is this thing up here that looks a little bit like a makeup compact. So just exactly what is this? This is a set of calibration cards for you to include when you're shooting, which is not unlike a photographer's gray card. So if you in fact, we do give you a photographer's gray card. This gray card is back there basically so you could set in-camera white balances. So the actual procedure differs time to time, camera to camera. For that, what you do is you hold it up in the light you're looking to calibrate for, take a photo of it, and then go to the back of your camera and follow the instructions there. Like I said, different manufacturers do it differently. The easiest way I can tell you there is just go online and Google it really quick, because even different cameras in different manufacturers do it differently. This is also something you can do if you're using your DSLR for video. So you can actually set a custom white balance using this in a still photo and then apply that to your video. Now, onto the other cards. So let's start at the top. So these are cards that you're going to include, like I said, in test shots when you're photographing for every lighting situation you encounter. So if you're going to be photographing me in here, first shot, have me hold this up. Take another test shot. And then later on, when you begin to process your RAWs, that's where the real power of this tool is going to come out. So very top, we have what's called a creative white balancing tool. And this top tool can actually be used in any software that allows you to set a custom white balance in camera. Excuse me, with a dropper. We just talked about in camera. So tippy top, colored checks. These colored checks are there mainly for reference for while you're shooting. It's very useful if you're shooting products and you know that a color needs to be a certain color. You have that there to look at in your files. In the same vein, on the bottom, we gave you white through black squares. This is for exposure checking, sort of like the blinkies or the exposure warnings that you can set on your camera. This is also there so you can keep an eye on the exposure when you're testing, because it does need to be a good exposure on the color checker. And so you can keep your eye on that to make sure the colors aren't going to clip later. Now the middle, though, is the actual custom white balancing tool. So those two squares up there that have the little nubs, you guys see how it's popped down a bit? Those are neutral. So if you took that test shot, bring it into Photoshop or Lightroom, you grab that eyedropper, you touch on that, it'll neutralize your white balance. Even if you didn't set a custom white balance in camera, even if you shot a tungsten white balance out in daylight, clicking on that will always neutralize it. And you're going to be surprised how much that little bit is going to save you time. because there's no more of this hunting and picking and looking for places to set a custom white balance. And I also, not so secretly, hate the term white balance, because I get the concept, but when you say white balance, it leads people to think they need to set their white balance on something white. And the real flaw there is how seldomly you're going to run into something that's actually white in the real world. I used to work in the wedding industry. I think it'd be easy. You set the white balance off the girl in the white dress. That's in 90% of your photos. So regardless of what tradition says, very rarely is there a pure white dress. And so if you're setting that white balance off of something that isn't actually white, you're kind of stumbling out of the bit color-wise. And that little mistake is going to follow you through the rest of your workflow, because computers and cameras really only see color because we tell them how. So if you're telling your computer this is neutral and it's not, there's no way it can know the difference. So we then took that tool and spread it out a little bit to make it even more useful. So in the very top, for portrait work, we gave you warming grays. So say that photo you took of me before where I was holding this up and I was in here, and you neutralize the white balance, the Kelvin's perfect, and I still look pale because, well, I work in the photography business. And you want to warm up my skin. You can actually take that dropper again and move it along the warming squares without ever having to go to the histogram, to the slider, to anything like that. And that makes it constant and it makes it repeatable. So you always know how much you can warm up a person by, and it's quick. Then on the bottom, if you notice on the bottom, the neutral's in the middle. So you can see on one side there's a snowflake, on the other side there's a sun. This is for landscape work. So you can now cool and warm. So we gave you the ability to cool and warm for landscapes, and we give you more steps of warming for portrait work. Again, just to speed up your workflow and make it consistent. So what is the bottom card then? The bottom card is the actual color checker itself. You guys remember when I was describing how you profile a monitor? There's very specific colors the device is looking for. This is a similar concept. These are very specific colors in a grid that the included Lightroom plugin and standalone software is designed to see. So it sees these colors, it uses it to run a test on your specific sensor, on your specific lens, in that specific lighting situation, and make you what's called a non-destructive DNG color profile. It's really important to note at this step that white balance isn't color calibration. You could have your white balance perfect and your camera still could not be rendering colors correctly. You could take 3 brand new Nikon D810s off the line, test them all color-wise. They're all going to be slightly different color-wise. Multiply that out by different models, different manufacturers, different ages, different, let's say, gentleness of use of gear. You're going to have a lot of variation color-wise, which can be a problem if you're shooting with multiple bodies or if you're shooting with other photographers. So this is going to read the camera and take it back to what's called ICC standards, which is the same standard we're correcting the monitor to. You can hear that a lot, ICC standards. So ICC stands for the International Color Consortium, which I know I always maintain that it sounds like a group of supervillains that Superman once fought. But it's actually just a governing body, similar to Pantone. You know, Pantone is the governing body for color and graphic design. It says, this is red, this is blue, this is green. ICC is the same thing for photography work. So this gets your camera on ICC-wise, and your monitors on ICC-wise. You know that you're looking at accurate, true color. So I know that last bit is like a big just sort of chunk when I'm just up here talking and flailing around with this. So I'm going to shift out again, and we're going to go into Lightroom, and I'm going to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. And I always find that's an easier way to show people stuff. So here we go. Let's see if I can make it bigger. So here we are in Lightroom. And I have a photo in Lightroom I'm going to start with that I purposely shot in the wrong white balance. You can see that it's really yellow because I shot daylight white balance inside. So make sure we're good to go. Grab that white balancing tool here. You go over and you go to the one with the nub, neutralize it. And so now our Kelvin is on, but there's still another step. We're going to make sure the camera is calibrated. So we're going to go to File, Export with Preset, Color Checker Passport. And then it's going to ask you to name the profile you're about to make. The idea is the more you use this card, you're going to build up a nice library. So this was my D700 with a 50mm lens in tungsten light. That's just how I name mine. That part's up to you guys as far as organization goes. But so I would name it, I'd hit save, and then the profiling plugin does everything else. It sees it, it reads it, it makes you the profile, and Lightroom restarts. And then, once it restarts, it's going to show up over here. You guys see the camera calibration? See how it says Adobe Standard? We don't want standard, ever. We want it dialed in specifically to our gear. So, drop that down. There's my D700 50mm lens tungsten. So watch the back row of the pool balls and watch the cue. They shift, right? So for whatever reason, even though my Kelvin was perfect, my camera wasn't rendering the colors correctly. Now I'm going to take you guys to my favorite example of it, which happens to be my cousin's wedding. So this is going to show you many things. It shows you the best part about it is calibrating multiple cameras together. And also, it just so happened to show a lot of colors that my camera had trouble with. So this is my cousin's husband-to-be. I shot the wedding with a buddy of mine. Beginning of the day, I was shooting the groom. He was outside. First thing I had him do was hold up the color checker passport. The first thing I did, again, went to white balance, grabbed that tool, and neutralized him. So you can see not much change there because the white balance for my daylight white balance, my D700 was pretty good. But he looks a little bit pale. I think anyone that was about to marry into my family would be pale as well. So grab that thing again, go in, and I'm just going to take him and watch his hands. A little bit warmer. So now he has a little bit more of a glow in his skin, and I was able to get it that easy. I didn't have to go into the sliders. I didn't have to move around the warmth. Click it in. I'm good to go. So now, I'm sure you've noticed he's wearing interesting pants. These are Rhode Island red pants, and he's sitting in a muscle car. And so there's a lot of colors going on right here. So I went up and I went File, Export with Preset, Color Checker Passport, and then I made one for my D700, happened to be my 50mm lens again, and this was daylight. And so this is when I found out that my Nikon doesn't like certain colors very much, for whatever reason. So here we go, daylight 50mm, watch the grass, watch the car, watch the pants. Huge shift. It just so happened that I was working with a lot of colors that are out of gamut. And my Nikon was just not bringing in those reds, and the blues and the purples, I mean, the purples, forget about it. And also, the greens weren't fully out. The grass looked a little bit dead. And so now what I can do is I grab all the other photos from that shoot. Same lighting, same lens, same lighting, same lens, same lighting, same lens, across like that. And I hit sync. And you sync the white balance, you sync the process version, and you sync the calibration. Then you hit synchronize. And so now everything I shot from that shoot has correct color and correct white balance that quickly. And I can move on to the next shooting situation. And you can see, I'll do it for you guys one more time, that the Adobe Standard, I mean, really washed out a lot of those colors that I happen to be working with. The grass looked dead. That muscle car that had just finished being painted the day before with a $5,000 paint job, the blue wasn't correct. And that would take a lot more work than what I just did to correct. There we go. So now, on the other side of town, my friend was shooting my cousin. And I think he was smart enough and maybe was forced to also use a color checker passport, which is great because you could see that his white balance here wasn't so great. So, again, the first thing I'm going to do is grab that tool, click on the neutralizing, zoom out, and you can see already things are a lot better. And then I did the same thing, export with preset, color checker passport, and now so he shoots Canon and I shoot Nikon. So I was able to make a profile for his camera without having to have his camera. And again, named it his camera. And also what's nice about it is when you go down to camera calibration, it's not going to give you all the profiles. Like all my Nikon profiles aren't going to show up, just the ones that I made for the Canon. And so now when I apply this, watch the floor. So he was off on yellows and magentas and I was off on blues and greens. Different systems, different spreads, but by using that tool, I was able to calibrate them both together. So now when you deliver the proofs, you can't tell a difference color-wise between the two shooters, between the two cameras, anything like that. And so now the same thing. I go over and I grab all the photos he shot in that lighting situation with that lens, which I know from looking at, just the XIF data. And then I hit sync. And so that was a lot faster. I always say that this gets you to the more fun part of editing faster. Because I know, even though I teach color science, that this is really the last part that you want to spend when you're editing your photos. You want them to be right, you want them to be good, and then you want to move on to doing whatever you want to do with them. Either printing them, manipulating them, anything like that gets you through very quick. So, note, eagle-eyed viewers might notice that the color checker is upside down in that photo. My friend does it all the time. I don't know what his problem is with that, but he always does it upside down. And he called me and he was like, oh no, I screwed it all up. Just rotate the photo, just flip the photo in the program. Just rotate it and the program will work. But if for whatever reason it's still failing, to make stuff easy for yourself, you want this to be at least 20% of the frame and facing straight ahead. But of course that's not always possible. So if you go into the standalone program, you can actually tweak that. So if you're having problems in Lightroom, the best thing to do is then go into the standalone. And that you export a DNG, you throw it in, and then you can move stuff around and basically do a transform on it, and you can get a good profile. So now we have everything set, and we're ready. We want to shift in. Let's say we want to shift into Photoshop. So let's go export. Now this is also something that's going to come up if you're opening your RAWs in Photoshop. This is where you're going to start moving into your workflow. And there's two really important things you have to choose right now. And then the problem is a lot of people don't know what they mean. But these next two choices are going to affect your workflow for the rest of the step through. So right here, file settings. We have color space. We have 3 color spaces here. And we have bit depth. 2 here. So 8-bit and 16-bit. And do we want it in sRGB, Adobe RGB, or ProPhoto RGB? So the color space issue can be a bit of a hot button issue. Photographers seem to love to argue about it. So let's start with bit depth. So we have a choice between 8 bits and 16 bits. But what does that even mean? So let me shift back into Keynote here. What those are talking about is the number of shades on each channel in the file, red, green, and blue. So an 8-bit file has 256 shades per channel, red, green, and blue. And so logically, you would then jump to the conclusion that a 16-bit has 512. But because this is photography and everything is nicely complicated, we're actually talking about exponents here. So an 8-bit is 2 to the 8th power. So that means a 16-bit is 2 to the 16th power, which gives you 65,536 shades per channel, which I don't really need this silly chart to show you guys that there's a big difference there. But why is that important? So this is where I begin to talk about a concept in workflow that I always had to keep in my mind. It's the funnel. You want to start as big as you can accurately work with to as small as you'd have to go. So even if you have to end up at a little 8-bit JPEG to put on the internet, you want to start at a 16-bit. And the reason there is, every time you edit a file from here on out, you're actually damaging those shades. And so you do that enough, and you're going to damage the file to the point where it doesn't have enough shades to do a gradient. Has anyone ever been working on a file and suddenly the sky begins to split apart? It begins to block up. You're just moving stuff around, and all of a sudden you see what looks like stairs in the sky, and there's no filter or blur you can put on it to make it go away. That's because whatever you were doing to that file damaged so many shades that there's no longer enough blues to make that sky. And if you've been working with a 16-bit file, you'd have way more information to work for until you got to that point. So if your output, the bottom of that funnel actually is an 8-bit JPEG for the internet, and you do some kind of crazy editing to it, and you damage 80% of the data, you still have over 13,000 shades to work with when it's time to mix down. And that's more than enough to keep things smooth. So it's always a good idea, again, as big as you can accurately work with to as small as you have to go. But now, let's move on to color space, of course, where things get a little bit more complicated. So I think a lot of people have probably seen color space represented this way, right? It's that big hoop there with all the color. That's the visible light spectrum. And then those triangles are the different color spaces that we work with. So In truth, color spaces are actually 3D, if you've ever seen that. It's actually I like to think it looks like a footprint. That's how I like to think of color spaces, is the device you're working with steps onto the visible light spectrum, and all the light that's contained in there is the color space. So going further with that metaphor, let's see that sRGB is kind of like the footprint from a ballerina slipper. And then Adobe RGB is maybe more like a sneaker. And then ProPhoto is like Shaq's sneaker. I mean, you can see that it steps off the visible light spectrum in places. And if you're anything like me and you're setting up your workflow, you see that and you're like, yes, color, all of it, give it to me. Put it in there, biggest funnel I possibly can. Unfortunately, things are not that simple with ProPhoto RGB. This was a color space that was developed by Kodak to encompass all likely real-world occurring surface colors, which again still sounds really awesome. Here's where the problem lies. There are no monitors in the world that can display that much color. So you can't really accurately work with it. Even if you were working in it, there are about 4 printers in the world that can print that much color, and they each cost about $400,000. So you can't actually work with it. You'll never be able to output to it, and it's for that reason I recommend people just forget about it. You're always going to have to come out of it. Even if you're working in it, you can't see it on your monitor. You're always going to have to convert it, and the more conversions you put in between you and where you want to be, the more chances you give yourself to make a mistake. So that leaves us with Adobe RGB and sRGB. So as much as I would like to stand up here and say, just pick one of these and go with it, I really can't, because the two of them actually have specific uses. So Adobe RGB is the color space you want to be in if you're looking to inkjet print, because most high-end inkjet printers' capabilities are very similar to this color space. So when you give the printer a file in this color space, the printer itself has to do less internal conversions, which gives you more accurate results, and that's the name of the game here today, right? More accurate results, better quality prints. However, has anyone ever been working in this color space and tried to put it on the internet? Doesn't go so well. If you try to put an Adobe RGB color spaced image on the internet, colors are going to shift, it's going to gray out, and it's basically going to do everything you don't want a file to do when you want people looking at your website. Reason there is very few browsers are color managed. For a while, I believe Firefox could support Adobe RGB. It just seems to go back and forth, but again, you can't control what browser the person on your internet is looking at. So you really want to be able to mix down and go into sRGB, and sRGB is the standard. That's what the S is for. And so why are most browsers not color managed past sRGB? Because most monitors are only sRGB. Even the wonderful iMacs that are coming out, even my Retina MacBook Pro, that is an sRGB monitor. So if you're not looking to inkjet print, or you're just sort of inkjet print when it's fun, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're looking to accurately inkjet print and accurately work in Adobe RGB, you have to start looking into specifically made photo monitors that can show that much color gamut. But in general, you're going to be working with sRGB. Moreover, most labs only take sRGB, again, because it's the standard, and they are taking files from all over creation, and they want it to be to a standard so they don't have a lot of customers yelling at them. But, so if you're working in sRGB and you are profiling your monitor, you shouldn't have a problem, because no matter how they're profiling their monitors, they're profiling the ICC standards. And so if you use one of the devices I showed you guys earlier to profile, you can be very confident that what you're seeing on your screen is what they're seeing on their screen. So just to have that make a little bit more sense, I share with you guys my personal workflow. This isn't the workflow I really used when I was working in the wedding industry or anything like this. This is my own artwork. So of course I start in a raw capture, and then I bring the raw capture in as a 16-bit Adobe RGB file. Then I do all my edits, and I save that as a 16-bit TIFF for inkjet printing. Because now even most modern inkjets can take 16-bit data, so you don't even have to downmix it. Then I convert it to sRGB, and I downmix it to 8-bit, and I save a nice JPEG for the website. And I just save them together in the same file, and folder, excuse me. So now it is advantageous that storage is at the price it is. You can afford to keep a high-res file for your prints and a low-res or a lower-res one for the website, and still be able to not have to go back or anything like that. But again, this lecture is about just arming you guys with knowledge and tools to set up your own workflow. You may not have to do this. If you're never going to inkjet print, you don't have to take that step. It's just all about the knowledge, about the tools, and then you just have to think 1 or 2 steps ahead about where you're going to go. If you're a photographer that is, always going to be just putting stuff on the internet, you never plan on printing it, then stay in sRGB. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just you have to make sure that it's the right settings for what you want it to do. But I like printing. I love inkjet printing. I grew up in the darkroom and stuff like that. I never really feel that photos are done until I have a print in my hand. So here we have a 16-bit TIFF in Adobe RGB ready to print. So what's the question on everyone's mind? How can I be sure that what I see on my screen is what comes out of my printer? So the answer to that comes in 2 parts: profiling and soft proofing. So every paper manufacturer gives you a profile if you're looking to inkjet print. So this is very similar to what we were doing for the monitor. These are specific profiles made for your specific printer and the paper you're going to look at. This is Ilford's new site, and this is where you would go to download all of, I have this set to the 3880, would download all the profiles for that. In general, these profiles are very good. If you have a calibrated monitor and you're using a profile made, you're going to be very close, especially if you're using Epson inks, Epson paper, and an Epson printer. And a calibrated monitor, you're going to be very, very close because they spent millions of dollars in R&D to make sure that stuff works. However, they can be a little conservative, right? Because they need to work with millions of different setups. So manufacturers tend to be a little bit conservative. So you could have the ability to print more colors more accurately than you even know because the profile is limiting you. And again, that was made, like I said before, we don't want standard. We want specific stuff for our gear. And then moreover, when you begin to play with different papers, say like an Ilford or a Red River or someone like that that doesn't make a printer, their profiles are even more conservative because they have to work on everyone's printer. So what we can do is, if we're still unhappy with the output, we can make custom paper profiles. And that's where the ColorMonkey Photo comes in. So ColorMonkey Photo is going to profile your monitor just like the way the ColorMonkey display did in the beginning. It'll all profile projectors. It will not profile mobile devices. Instead, it'll profile a printer. And the whole push of this device is what you see is what you get. So this is how it looks. When you launch the software, you can see it's very similar to the ColorMonkey display. Match my printer to my display, profile my printer. If you want to do it all in one fell swoop, that's the first button. If you want to separate them out, obviously you're going to be profiling your monitor more than you are profiling your printer. Choose that in the middle. But for now, let's see what profile my printer looks like. So first thing it's going to ask you is optimize or create new. So remember how I said you should reprofile your printer? Reprofile your monitor on a certain schedule. With a printer, that schedule is way less. That's what optimize an existing profile is for. I suggest you just check up on the profiles you make once a year, just to make sure your printer's printing right and everything is still copacetic. But right now I have selected create new profile. And obviously we're not doing this live because I don't have a printer with me, so just bear with this. And you would choose a printer and then you would name it. And this is when I was making a profile for Ilford Smooth High Gloss. So the first thing it's going to do, once you hit next, is it's going to print out test chart. Looks just like this. And again, remember the specific colors that we're looking for when we're profiling a monitor, the specific colors we're looking at when we're profiling the camera. Same thing. So this is asking the printer to put out these specific colors. And you actually use the device to scan it in. And you're going to scan in the 5 ones. It's going to take it, and these charts are iterative. So once you do that, it's going to make you a second chart, just like this. Do the same thing again. Now, the only bummer to this part is dry down. Ink needs to be dry to get an accurate reading. So there's actually a timer built into the software. So this takes a little bit longer than monitor profiling. You have to wait 10 minutes before you do each reading, just because you don't want to get an off reading on a bad ink. And so you do this for each paper you put through. If you have 5 papers you love printing on, you do this 5 times. And now you have profiles that are tailored to your printer. You have a profile that's tailored to your monitor. You have a profile that's tailored to your camera. Everything should just carry over. And it also gives you the ability to set that as the default profile. So you can see here it says that my premium luster is a default profile. That's just the paper I print on the most. So and in those softwares, when I go to print, that'll come up automatically. Ooh. So now the second part, which is soft proofing, which I will go into Photoshop for because we've already been giving Lightroom a lot of attention. So, ooh. This is Colorado Greg Gorman's images. Forgot they were still up there. So, we just made a profile, and labs also provide you with profiles. And what you can now do with your calibrated monitor is soft proof. So even Costco now will give you a profile for their printers. So now you know that you're seeing the same colors they are. They're going to be telling you what colors they can print. And that's the last step, right? Because you can see it accurately, but if you have a bright red on your photo that they can't print, that's going to shift. So let me open up a file to work on. So the truth is, this tends to be a bit of a subtle process unless you're taking photos of really crazy stuff. So luckily, I have, let's say, questionable choice in footwear. So I have really bright shoes we can work on. So you go up to View, Proof Setup, and Custom. So here, in a device to simulate, you can either select the paper profile that came with your printer, you can select the profile that your lab sent you, or you can select the custom profile we just made with the Color Monkey photo. So let me grab one here. Let's see with premium luster on the 9900. You can see it shift. You guys see that? I can do it again. So as you shift through these, the different gamuts, see the red shift? So what this is telling you is how out-of-gamut colors are going to be effective, which is to say colors that your monitor can make, but your printer can't make. And that's going to be different. If you could see there that I went between a 3880 and a 9900, they have different ink sets. So obviously a printer with 4 inks can make more colors than a printer with 8 inks, printer of 12 inks. And the same thing goes for how your lab is going to be printing. And so the last real choice we have to make here is how to tell the printer how to deal with those out-of-gamut colors. So you can see here, rendering intent. That's the last big choice. So 4 here, perceptual, saturation, relative color metric, and absolute color metric. Now, 2 of these have no use in photography. I really wish that they would make that clearer. So saturation, no use in photography. Saturation is if you're printing charts, and the change in color is important, but not the specific hue. And then absolute color metric is for medical imaging, actually, where colors have to be super exact or else someone's getting a bad diagnosis. So the 2 that we're going to be working with are perceptual and relative color metric. And you can see there's a shift, right? So in perceptual, my red shoes would look like that. In relative color metric, my red shoes would look like that. I know it's shifting a lot over here. Is it shifting a lot in the front for you guys? Yes. Same with my blue shoes. So what are we actually saying there? What does that mean? So let me shift right back into Keynote. So when you choose relative color metric, you are telling the program to take all the out-of-gamut colors, which are basically the colors we have orbiting around that circle, and map them in to their nearest in-gamut equivalent. Pro. All those colors that were in the middle there, they didn't move at all. So everything that was in gamut didn't change. So if you don't have a lot of out-of-gamut colors, this is a good choice because most likely nothing will change. However, we might run into that banding issue again. Again, the culprit is always sky tones, right? If you have a really nice blue sky and for some reason the blues in that blue sky are out of the gamut of your printer, when you choose this rendering intent, what could happen is all those blues will come in to the same in-gamut blue and they'll just sit on top of each other and you'll get banding. So perceptual is the choice if we have that issue, we want to get rid of banding. So perceptual, when you choose that, what you're actually doing is telling it to take everybody and just squeeze everybody a little bit so everybody fits in. Pro there is that you won't get banding. Con there for some people is you will get color shifts. Everybody's going to move a little bit. Again, this all depends on how out of gamut you are. I mean, I had to go out and, well, I had to shoot that photo of those ridiculous red shoes because the reds are like super out of gamut. And it might not be an issue for you if you're shooting landscapes or whatever, something like that, and you don't have a lot of out of gamut greens, you could be fine. But that's the upside of soft proofing, is that you're getting the most accurate look at your photos and your colors before you ever send them to print. And so now you know that everything's calibrated and you can get on there, you can be confident to send out to that lab to press print out of that inkjet, and you're not going to waste money. So last thing I want to show you guys before we open this up for Q&A is a few websites. Here we go. So the first website, I just want to let you guys know about a contest we have going on right now called Where in the World is Your Color Checker Passport? If you already have one or you're looking to purchase one for the rest of the summer, take a picture of it while you're traveling, wherever you're shooting, anything like that. Share it online with hashtag Color Checker Contest, and you'll be entered to win prizes like these calibrators, or even, remember those photos that came up when I opened up Photoshop from photographer Greg Gorman? He's donating one of those prints as the grand prize. So it's a really cool contest. Just wanted to bring it up here. The other one is the Xrayed Photo blog. So this is blog.xrayedphoto.com. I and a few other photographers write stuff on here. And as you can see right up there, file basics, I wrote something on bit depth because people had a lot of questions about bit depth. And if you have more questions, total honesty, this is the easiest way to get a hold of me. Because emails, all that stuff comes in. But if you leave a comment on the blog, it goes right to me, and I can answer it, and I can answer it in a way that everybody else can see the answer. And if I get enough questions, like I was getting enough questions on the bit depth issue, I'll write a whole article on it. So this is a great blog, a great way to get a hold of me and get your questions answered. Then, like we said, this is being recorded today, but at Xrayed we record tons of videos, and they're all archived at xrayedphoto.com/learning. ASPX. So just xrayedphoto.com, the learning tab. Every video we've done is up there, and there's, oh God, there's hundreds of hours on it. So if anything doesn't stick today and you want to see something go again, they're all up there. Oh, thank you. Hope you guys help.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.